Professor LUKOYE ATWOLI is in the studio with us this morning. Good morning, Prof.
Morning.
Karibu sana to Kenya's biggest conversation. You're in the hot seat, but perhaps it's you who's going to be giving up the heat this morning, because you're going to tell us the psyche of some of these decisions that we make and where it all comes from. Professor ATWOLI is the Professor of Psychiatry and Dean at the Aga Khan University Medical College. And oftentimes when we think about psychiatry and we think about things like that, we go quickly to assume that somebody is off their rocker, and we're having the conversation this morning about the pathology of political leadership in Kenya. Big words. Big words.
Quite technical.
Right. But, the mental makeup. And when we think about it, we think, well, of the people that are in leadership, but then what does it not also encompass the makeup of the decisions we make? I think there's a phrase that has been used more times than any during this political season, that you cannot make the same decisions every time and expect different results, kind of thing. So based on that and what we see, that it seems as though when going to the ballot, the same decisions are made over and over again, but we want something different for the country.
Question is, who is we? Who is we that want something different? If it is the same we that want something different, and then when we go vote, we vote the same way, then obviously we don't want something different.
We struggle with this question quite often, and so I think this is an opportune time to have it, because then to look and say, no, I don't think we've really ever done it, to then look at what happens in the mind with thinking, then that makes you as an individual, which you then make up another unit, family, you then make up another unit, community, another one, society, eventually nations.
Yep.
Thinking in the same manner, what influences thought, especially when it is geared towards who you choose to lead you?
Yeah, I'll begin by saying that the democratic process that we engage in, such as we are going to engage in the next couple of weeks, gives us an illusion of choice. So when you say that we choose, it's an illusion of choice, because we don't really choose. We are presented with options, and then from those options, we purport to make decisions for different positions. But having said that, I'm a psychiatrist, and you've invited me to speak about pathology, and I'll focus on psychopathology. So I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated for you.
Okay. All right.
So psychopathology is really, pathology is really just abnormality. Abnormality. This is pathology, disease. And when you say psychopathology, is abnormality of the mind, and how the mind fails to function or functions abnormally. And in the context of political decision making, I'd ask you to imagine that there are 50 million Kenyans, about half of whom are adults who are registered to vote. And then starting from pathology, I would begin by looking at personality pathology. And there's a good reason why I do this. There are personalities that are unhelpful or harmful, or personality traits that are unhelpful or harmful. And these are clustered into three categories. And when I give you these three categories, you would want to think about who is more likely to present themselves for leadership from among those three categories. The first category of these unhelpful personality traits are those that we call odd or eccentric. These are people who live in their own world. So they might be paranoid. In other words, they think everybody has it in for them. Or they might be schizoid, meaning they keep to themselves a lot. Or they might be schizotypal, which means almost schizophrenic, almost mentally ill. The second category are those that are dramatic. The word is dramatic. And these include those with antisocial personality disorder, those with traits of borderline personality, traits of histrionic personality, and traits of narcissistic personality. So these are people who are dramatic. and they will be the center of attraction. Some of them might enjoy hurting other people. Some of them might enjoy watching other people suffering. But invariably, they want to be the center of attention. The last category are those who have anxious personality types. And so we have avoidant, we have people who are dependent, they can't function on their own, and we have people who are obsessive compulsive, they are basically lost in detail. Now, if you have those three categories of personalities, and I ask you, who among those is likely to present themselves for leadership? Which cluster do you think will be most likely to present themselves for leadership? There are those in the second category, cluster B, the dramatic ones. And among those, we have antisocial personalities who enjoy watching people suffering, who have no remorse when they make mistakes, who blame everybody else except themselves for anything that goes wrong. If you ask them, why didn't you do this? They say, I didn't have the power to do it. If you ask them, why did you hurt that person? Well, he deserved it. And so on. No, they have it in for me. Or I'm the one who's supposed to be here. Nobody else is supposed to be here. I'm the only one who can save this country, and so on. So those are the groups of people who present themselves for leadership. Okay? And they are derived from our population. They don't come from Mars.
Right.
So just remember that they're in our population, and they present themselves, and then we are presented with the illusion of choice to select from among those people.
Why is it an illusion? And even I know Siti has a question, because he can already think of individuals who've put themselves up for election today who have fell right into those categories that you described.
But I'm not naming names.
Of course not. Why is it an illusion, though?
It's an illusion because if it were truly a process of looking for and finding the best person to lead a section, a country, a constituency, you might want to have used a different method of identifying those people and asking people to present themselves for leadership and then putting them on a ballot and then asking people to select from among them is not probably the best way of identifying the best people for a job. It is probably the best way of making people feel like they're involved in decision making, making people feel like they're selecting their leaders and so on. But it often churns out the average or often the worst from among the pool.
Professor, if I hear you correctly, you have actually just declared that what we consider to be the democratic process is an illusion.
But is it not?
Is it really?
So the illusion Ndu started by saying that people go and make a choice, and that we make choices, and that we want different, but we keep making the same choices. That there is the illustration of the illusion. Because sitting in this room, we say we want a certain kind of leader. We want a person who will take this country from this place to this place. And then we go into the polling booth and we select the exact opposite of what we have said. Because when we get into the polling booth, firstly, we don't see that person that we have described in this room on the ballot. We don't. What we end up seeing are people who have been selected through various methods, but beginning by putting themselves forward for leadership. And only a certain group of people put themselves up for leadership. Not every citizen will put themselves up for leadership, including the very best people who could be leaders. Most of them will not put themselves up for leadership. And so if you wanted the best person to lead a club, to lead a constituency, to lead a country, asking people to put themselves up for leadership already restricts the choice to only a certain group of people who are most likely to put themselves up for leadership.
Is it for the same? Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
But the question I have, Professor, is then assuming we chose leaders like the way it's done in the corporate world, interviews, and you have a panel of 4 or 5 choosing on our behalf, does it necessarily translate into good leadership? We've had also
absolutely not. Absolutely not. So what I'm saying is we probably have a very good idea about how not to choose the best leader. But we are still experimenting in figuring out which is the best way of selecting the best leader. And that's why everybody's trying all sorts of things. Even in the corporate sector, when they do those methods, they often fail. Sometimes they end up with the most pathetic person who came in and, promised heaven and delivers hell. So we are experimenting in finding out who's the best. So every once in a while, we light upon an individual who's the best fit, who is perfect for the position for a period.
Let me just probe further. So you've described the various types of leaders and who comes up for leadership. I don't know if we are going into this later, but I would also want to understand the other way, the flip side, the voters. So is there a link, our traits and linking to how we choose leaders?
Yeah, there's absolutely. There's a link because these leaders don't come from Mars. They come from the same population of voters. It's just that if you did an experiment and went into a collection of so-called leaders, even if you selected them as elected leaders, and then randomly selected members of the adult population and compared the two, they're different. They're not the same. However, you'll find that these leaders come from a certain cluster from among the general population.
Right.
They're not randomly distributed in the general population. And yet, the good traits that you're looking for are randomly distributed in the general population. Even the bad traits are randomly distributed in the general population. But if you go among the leaders, they're a very select group of people with certain traits that they have in common. So while they come from the general population, they do not necessarily represent the general population because of the process by which they emerge and are placed in positions of leadership.
Would you then say perhaps that what is spoken of anecdotally and what some form of research has also supported, that people actually like to be led?
It is a quirk of human evolution that when people started clustering together and living together in society, in organized society, that those societies that had single powerful leaders were more successful than those that did not have single powerful leaders. And because of conflict and elimination and so on, we ended up more and more with societies that had single powerful leaders engaging each other than societies where people engage at individual levels in a disorganized way. And so we have ended up here where we are today because our societies organize themselves the way they did, and they organize themselves around leaders. So we are a product rather than the ones producing this scenario.
But that's an interesting point because, the inverse could be argued, because as you lead, those who choose to lead, those of those personality traits, enjoy being in that position. And so the evolutionary process somehow seems to dictate that they would find the best possible position to be in to allow them to continue leading. And perhaps this is what then allows for what we now call democracy to come into being, where you give the impression that you also have a say in what is going to happen.
So imagine two different social groups in the African savannah where we all started out. And one group has a leader, strong, powerful, who tells everybody where to go, and they listen, they don't argue. Okay? And another one has a group of people who give suggestions.
He has a committee.
So people might listen or not, and people might decide what to do or not. And then these two are exposed to a pack of lions. All right? And this one with the strong leader says, guys, run this way and enter this cave and block it. And everybody does that. This other one says, run this way. And they say, no, why that way? Why shouldn't we go this way? So which one, if you came back a week later, which one will you find still existing?
The one who went to the cave, the one with the one strong.
And that is the evolutionary process. That's how we were selected. That's how we ended up where we are today.
But let me ask, the selection that somebody then puts themselves up for leadership.
Yeah.
What is it then that precludes these others whom you've mentioned could actually be better leaders than those who are in the limelight? Yeah. Is it because they fall in these other two categories of anxious or, the odd or eccentric? Yeah. Do they not put themselves up for leadership because they fall in those two categories, or is there something that they do not have? What would be the reasons that you see?
So the average person will not put themselves up for leadership. The average person is just focused on what they need to do from the beginning of the day to the end of the day.
To get along.
To get around and get along and to survive. So it's not something that crosses your mind on an average day that I should put myself up for leadership.
No.
So it's only a certain group of people who get thoughts like those. And they're the ones that we get. They're the ones we enter. So the vast majority of humans are focused on surviving first. I need to survive this day. And if you have survived, then you focus on thriving. I need to do better than the next guy. And there are different measures of success. Leading people is a measure of success only for a group of people, for a certain subset of humans, not everyone. There are brilliant people out there, very innovative, who come up with all sorts of brilliant ideas, but it never crosses their mind that they should put themselves up for leadership. Every once in a while, accidentally they come into the public limelight because of something they have done. And then they're recognized, and some people might push them into positions of leadership with varying degrees of success.
So are you saying it's related to wealth, and I'm better off than others in this community? I'm driving, I have a good house, I have wealth I need to protect. Is it about wealth? People who are wealthy are likely to be our leaders?
So not necessarily, because there are people who are wealthy who are not interested in leadership. And some of them are interested in influencing those leaders, having those people up there doing things, but then I tell them what to do without necessarily putting myself up for leadership. So it's not necessarily wealth. And just remember the way our society is set up, only a certain group of people are likely to get certain amounts of wealth. Not everybody again. Yeah, the average guy needs to fill his stomach and the stomach of his family and sleep under a roof and cover themselves and be warm, and they're done.
But there are examples where in a certain community, it could be women or youth who came up with this campaign and said, we want to pick so and we'll support this guy. They fundraise, they give this guy all the resources, and that person ascends to leadership. And they come from disadvantaged positions, and you find they're now even graduating to the wealthy class of people.
But
we have this,
But that presents yet something, I think, a little more interesting, because you talk about wealth. Is wealth a means or is it an end? Because at the end of all this, there's this, I'm going to use the word nefarious. It isn't actually nefarious, and it's also transitory position of what you call power and how you see it.
And power and wealth go together.
And isn't
not
it
necessarily.
both?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
But isn't it both? That it's a means, that this wealth is a means for you to get to the end, which at the end is still the wealth that folks are looking for.
Yeah, so I mean, you have to think about wealth. What is wealth? Wealth is not necessarily just having a lot of money.
No.
Yeah, wealth is the ability to influence everything around you in your favor. So that ability, acquiring that power, can be a means of wealth.
It can.
Yes. Yeah. So at the end of the day, some people will pursue wealth in order to use it to influence others as power, and others will pursue power in order to get financial wealth. And we've seen that in this country. The two might be related, but they're not. They're not the same thing. They're all a means of people influencing others.
The thing that I've found puzzling from time to time is, I've heard people give simple explanations, but I am dissatisfied with some of those explanations. With every successive electoral period, you find more and more people vying for elective positions, and yet it is clear that irrespective of where you are, even if you have 20 MCAs, only one competitors, only one will be an MCA. Yes. And across all other positions that people vie for. And what is evident is the financial ruin that people encounter. It's evident, and examples are given. Yet, time and time again, people venture. What is this thing in the mind that convinces them that it is them this time as opposed to not being them?
Prof, I'm going to ask you if we can go to a break on that, because that's a good thing to hold on to, and then come back and look at that.
This is The Situation Room the only way to start your day.
Alex Chamwada and our guest for the hour, Professor LUKOYE ATWOLI. And we're looking at psyche. We're looking at very many things this morning. CT had a question as we went to the break. You want to recap on that?
Yes, I do. This thing that I find puzzling, against all the evidence that is available, people vying in increasing numbers every single electoral cycle for elective positions, when it is clear that the attrition rate is really high. The economic damage or catastrophe that befalls the majority of those people is high. And yet, they are convinced. Because if they weren't convinced, they would not do the things that they're doing. I mean, some of the things that people do defy any logic that you can think of. They are willing to hawk an entire lifetime accumulation for this one job. What is it?
So firstly, I'll say that the number of people vying for positions this year, for instance, is not that much. There are a few tens of thousands in a population of tens of millions. Okay, so it's not really like a huge, staggering number of people putting themselves up for leadership. But secondly, you raise a very good point that some people believe, against all evidence to the contrary, that they are going to win or that they're the best for this position and so on. And again, I came to talk about pathology. So this takes me to the realm of mental illness. And I'm not saying that anybody vying is mentally ill, but some of those traits that you describe are traits of people who could be described as being delusional. And delusions occur in many mental illnesses. In some of the mental illnesses, for instance, bipolar disorder, somebody might get manic. And when you're manic or hypomanic, which is slightly less disruptive than mania, you might believe that you're the best gift to humanity since Jesus Christ, or perhaps even before Jesus Christ. You might think that I am really the best person. So we call those grandiose delusions. And you'll find many people who have grandiose delusions among those that put themselves up for leadership. Somebody who thinks, I'm the best for this, nobody's better than me. And there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. Like if you sit down and evaluate this person's decisions since they started making decisions, they made pretty stupid decisions. But then they still believe that they are the best for this position. So among those 40,000 or so people who are putting themselves up for leadership, there's a good number who are delusional. I mean, whom you can sit down and say, my friend, what are you doing? And they will not be convinced. They will continue. So it's a possibility. We have said that we are doing a national survey on mental health in Kenya. We are planning that now. And right now we work on estimates. And it's been estimated that probably up to 1 in every 4 Kenyan will have suffered from some mental illness or other in their lifetime. And perhaps a half of people who go to hospital in Nairobi and its environs for any reason except mental illness, half of those people have been found to have depression in a study that was conducted by Professor Ndetei a few years ago. So mental illness is pervasive. Access to treatment, diagnosis is poor. So many of us are walking around with undiagnosed mental illness.
So are you then saying that decisions being made, and I'm not just talking about political decisions, an everyday decision, how to get around the day, how to, make a decision on work, school for children, etc. And then let's even graduate to the political decision. Every decision that is being made for at least 50% of the population is being made under the pressure of a possible mental illness.
Yeah, every decision we make is influenced by a multiplicity of factors, including the state of your mind and the environment in which you find yourself in. Now, if the state of your mind is unstable, and it is for a significant proportion of our population, then that indeed influences the decisions that we make.
Is that not a worrying thing?
It is worrying, which is why in this country at least, and I'm happy to say 3 years ago, the president, no less than the president himself,
yes,
standing on a podium on Madaraka Day, declared that we have a crisis in mental health.
Yes.
And that is true. In fact, it's an understatement saying that we have a crisis. It's an epidemic. It's the magnitude of mental health problems in this country is several orders of magnitude greater than COVID-19. It's several orders of magnitude greater than HIV. Several orders of magnitude greater than TB, malaria.
So if you extrapolate,
Yes.
Professor, then it is possible for us to say that decisions you make on whom will lead you then are not normal decisions.
You know, what you define as normal. I mean, normal for us is that some people who are not very stable mentally make decisions. And some people who are extremely okay mentally make decisions. And we get the aggregate of that. And that is what we put up as leaders.
You know, Professor, the thing that thing that I find disturbing, this morning,
You could
Yeah.
be slightly unstable.
that likelihood exists. Yes,
Yeah.
you see, I am looking at the surveys. I am looking at the directives from the Ministry of Health and the President to determine our condition and the eminent personalities who are involved in some of these processes. Okay? And then I look at recurring issues that clearly point to mental instability, they increase.
We read them every day here.
We talk
Absolutely.
about them every single day.
Yes.
Now, when we talk about mental health, I have to ask, even with the meager resources, as we like saying that we have, are we saying that what we are doing now is the best that we could do? The question I'm asking is, those who are charged with policy and implementation, what state of mind are these people in?
Are they mentally okay?
No, because you have a problem, it's an abyss. You can see it. You can see us heading towards it. And beyond telling us this is where we are, nothing.
Yeah. So, I'll give credit where it's due. That the president, after making that declaration, he took several steps to start addressing it. He commissioned a task force to look at to crystallize the problem and to identify solutions, and he did that. And when he got the report, he's been implementing it. And the minister, Mutahi Kagwe, similarly gave a personal undertaking to do as much as he can before his term comes to an end in the next couple of weeks to, implement as much as they can. And we are hopeful that whoever comes on board after the elections will continue with that. So there is some work going on. Is it the best we can do? Obviously not. We don't invest as much as we can in mental health. Perhaps because, as you say, people have attitudes towards mental health which are informed by their own state of mental health. And I say this with all seriousness, that we do have people with untreated mental illness making decisions for the country in various positions. It's just a fact that you can extrapolate from the fact that a significant majority of our population have untreated mental illness. We elect some of them. We appoint some of them into serious positions of power, but they have untreated mental illness. And some of them have personality disorders.
Prof, this is quite thought-provoking. In fact, as I sit here, I'm just asking myself whether I'm mentally okay. Where do I fall? Where do I fall? And you gave us 3 categories of people who seek leadership, the odd, the dramatic, the anxious. And there is this belief that people tend to pick the most dramatic. You'll hear people saying, so-and-so is colorless.
Yes.
Atumwoni is colorless in his or her campaigns.
Exactly.
So people follow drama.
Yes.
And there are many avenues through which those seeking leadership get exposure, visibility, media, public rallies. There are various. Modern technology. So, to what extent has any research been done to find out? Is it true that we tend to choose the most dramatic? Are the others who don't fall in this category disadvantaged?
Yes, so those in that dramatic category are the ones who are most likely to present themselves for leadership in the first place. They're the
So
ones
we are likely to be choosing from
among
the most dramatic.
Yes.
Okay.
And we've seen it. In this country, we've seen politicians do the most dramatic things that you can
Indeed.
think about. I mean, somebody has been seen in the past, and I wrote about this in my column when I used to write for the Sunday Nation. Somebody was seen punching walls, punching tarmac, saying incoherent things in front of the media. And what did we do? We elected the fellow.
Prof, if you think that was odd, there is a gentleman who stripped himself naked
Yes.
and tied himself in chains and got elected as a member of parliament.
Absolutely. There's another one who, in one of those county assemblies, he undressed in the chambers during debate. Completely undressed himself.
One would argue that perhaps he was trying to make a point and he was grabbing attention.
He was definitely trying to make a point.
Yes. So now,
and he did make the point.
does that and does that necessarily lead to the fact that there's something wrong with him?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if in that particular county assembly, among the standing orders is that you can make a point by undressing, then that's fine. That's fine. But to my knowledge, in that county assembly, they frown upon people walking in undressed, and he did it. So dramatic. Those are the people who present themselves for leadership, and they're the people we elect, and then they do dramatic things.
Prof, I want to ask something else. Every time one talks about health issues, one thinks of enormous costs involved with health issues. Do decisions have to have that tag? Must that tag be the constant reality that it costs a lot? Can mental health be dealt with at community level, at village level, at community health worker level?
I think it's a peculiarity of our Kenyan policy-making landscape that we attach monetary value or cost to every single thing we are planning. In this country, if I'm building a public hospital, the headline will say, Professor ATWOLI is building an 80 billion shilling hospital.
Of course.
He's building a 120 trillion shilling road. He's building a 50 billion shilling SGR, and so on. Normally, one would think that you would say he's building an 80-bed hospital with the following specialized services. He's building a 3-lane highway, 40 kilometers. He's building an airport of this capacity. That's what I would think that people would be looking at. And then you say, okay, so what do I need to do that? But here we start with the amount of money, and then we say building an 8. You can build a 1 room for 20 billion shillings. So when you say a 20 billion shilling hospital, what are you saying? So this is the problem. So when we talk about health, somebody says in order to address the problem of mental health, we will need 40 billion shillings. That's not true. We probably need more, we might need less. But the key thing is, what are we trying to address? Can we deal with mental health problems from the community level? Yes, we can. Because there are certain simple interventions that can be done in the community level to identify people with distress and provide them with support that prevents escalation. There are certain things we can provide in the local health center that people can run there when they're starting to feel unwell and they're taken care of and they go back home without needing to go and see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And then there are certain services that can be put in county hospitals and at the national level that provide care for the more complicated issues. This need not cost huge amounts of money, but if they do, then that is money well spent. For every $1 you spend on mental health, you make $2 or $3 more. I mean, it's an investment. It's not a cost. And I would argue that for most of the social services that we talk about, health, education, security, we shouldn't be putting the cost ahead of what we want to do, because that then blurs the values. Our values become measured by the amount of money that we are spending on something, and that creates room for corruption.
Right.
Because then I will inflate the cost and tell you it's more valuable because it is more expensive, instead of thinking about intrinsic value and then think about what I need to get things done.
If we were to take a walk into the ideal for a moment and say that, yes, then you have a robust mental health policy that is then being practiced in the country, and that you have people then seeking the care that they need should anything get into the realm of the unbalanced. Would you then, with the things that we have pre-established, would you then be able to say that folks would be making decisions about the things that affect them on a daily basis, leadership, etc., in a more, and I want to use it carefully, proper manner, if the mental health issues have been dealt with?
So we have examples of places where people started with values or have set their systems based on values. And one of the core values is the value of human life, for instance, saying that before I make any decision, I have to look at its impact on the lives of the people. And in those countries, which I'm not going to name for obvious reasons, in those countries, political contests are not as hot as in countries such as ours, where we are led by money and other considerations. In those countries, people wake up in the morning, go to the post office, vote, and go to work. And then in the evening, while sharing coffee or tea, they check to see who won the election. And when they pass him or her in the streets, they might even not recognize the fellow in those countries, because it's no longer an important decision.
It's not a life and death issue.
Not a life and death decision. But here, we have twisted those values, and many of those dramatic fellows even over-dramatize in order to win, so that they make money, so that they go and, lord it over everyone else. So it's a total wrong mindset. So I think if we addressed ourselves to a value system, not a value system that is legislated or written in a constitution, but a value system that is really in our hearts.
Yes.
Perhaps we'll start making more rational decisions, because even that guy who is mentally ill, instead of throwing him out there and telling him you're going to become a leader, we might give him help.
Sure.
And when he gets help, he might think better, and he might even be a better leader in that regard. And if I know that if I didn't sleep well last night, I can walk to a facility next door and speak to someone, and they will explain why I didn't sleep well and help me to sleep well tonight, I'm likely to make better decisions for myself and for my family and for my community.
The pressures that people go through on a daily basis, so in some cases, are far from understood. And previously you talked about, so who votes? Who gives these people these positions? And then we many times we've put blame on, you can't take that token from a politician, for example, to be able to vote for. I mean, don't do that. We stand on a high horse sometimes and say that you can't. But we cannot run away from the reality that for some people, it is the saving grace on the day. That their children will be able to eat that day because of that token that they've received, however way you choose to look at it. We cannot also then run away from the fact that you remember who has saved you in a situation. And so when you make the decision to give this person your vote, it's not necessarily because you think they're going to do a good job, but in that moment when you needed their help, they helped. How do you reconcile the pressure and then the consequent action?
So when a person is voting, the mark they put on the ballot is the end point of a long process that goes beyond the electioneering period. It's a consequence of values that a person has. It's a consequence of the life they have led, the people they hang out with, the things they talk about at the dinner table, and the 200 bob he received.
Sure.
So you have to weigh that 200 bob he received against the longer line of experiences this person has had and the mindset he carries into that polling booth. And if you think about it like that, then the 200 bob might not be as persuasive in the person's final decision making. So if he decides to vote for this fellow, it might not be because of the 200 bob. It might be because of something else. It might be because this guy is vying against a woman and I don't vote for women.
Sure.
It might be because this guy speaks another language and I don't speak that language, and I'll just not vote for people who don't speak my language, and so on. It might be that I'm voting for him because he looks like me, rather than the fact that he gave me 200 bob is a bonus. It's a good thing. And the second thing is, human beings have the capacity to compartmentalize. It's stupefying. I mean, if you just see, this person might tell you, you gave me 200 bob, but this one is my brother. So people make decisions based on a long chain of events, and the politician going to give 50 shillings and expecting to win might have to do a little bit more than giving the 50 shillings. If I lived on 100 bob a day, and you came and gave me 100 bob, I will take it. That is one day sorted. Especially if I've spent this day in your campaign rally instead of going to Mjengo to make my 100 bob. If you give me the 100 bob, that's what I've earned for today. And I don't blame a person for taking that money. And I just understand that the decision making at the poll will probably not be solely because you gave me 100 bob.
Can I throw a little cat among this particular group of pigeons? What role does poverty play in all this? Because I'm actually looking at poverty as a contributory factor to one's mental condition.
So poverty is a huge driver for mental ill health and distress. And you know, in our society, poverty is largely constructed.
Yes.
It's not real. I mean, it's not necessarily a necessary condition. Many of the people we call poor, using World Bank metrics, are not poor. You go to Huisero, where I come from, and you find this guy who doesn't have a job. And he spends most of his time in the market center, chatting up people and so on. And when he sees me, he asks me for 50 shillings. And when I give him 50 shillings, he goes and buys changa and drinks and goes home. Now, if I follow him home, he has his own land. He has his own compound. He has his own house. There are bananas in that compound. There are chicken running around in that compound. There is traditional vegetables growing in a vegetable patch. And I say this guy, because he doesn't earn a single cent any day, is poor. That's just not true.
Yeah, and away from poverty, which is also a very key factor when discussing this subject, illusion, there is also tribe that we gang up depending on how we are affiliated to a certain community, that we are tribe. We'll make decisions on tribal basis. To what extent does this contribute to that illusion, and is it unique to Kenya?
No.
Does it happen in developed democracies in the US? Do we have the equivalent of tribe? Things like race. Do certain communities gang in a certain way to choose leaders?
Yeah, human beings are a tribal species. I mean, we are here because we became a tribe of humans to begin with, and then we started dividing ourselves into smaller tribes. And wherever you go, humans have the propensity to find people who look like them, who behave like them, and create an in-group, and everybody else is in the out-group, whatever you call it. So here we are called tribes, which when these words were coined, they were meant to be derogatory. Tribes are primitive, and the nations are civilized. Okay, but they are all tribes. I mean, or nations, depending on where you are. So if we colonized the UK, we would call the English a tribe. We will call the Welsh a tribe. We will call the Scotsmen a tribe, and so on and so forth. So we are a tribal. It's natural for us to try and find people who look like us and elevate them. However, if you want to make that process useful and not harmful to society as a whole, you might want to help people to appeal to a higher tribe. So in Kenya, we appeal to the tribe called Kenya. And say, listen, no matter what else you think and who else looks like you, there's a tribe called Kenya whose interests we are calling you to uphold and to support. So many people do that, and this creates this nationalistic mindset, and people starting to think about the whole country rather than my village. So it's normal. I mean, you go to the US, there are tribes there of Africans, there are tribes of Italians or Europeans, largely rich, Asians,
the Jews,
South America. So tribe can be religious, tribe can be a social grouping, can be language-based, whatever it is.
But it's there.
It's there.
Let's say goodbye to our audience on KTN Home and KTN News. Thanks for joining us. The conversations continue on SpiceFM as we come back and wrap up this conversation with Professor LUKOYE ATWOLI. So, I mean, even as we're, going forward, you talk about, the committee that's coming together to really look at this mental health situation in the country. Elections are in a few days. Perhaps there's very little that can be done about how we think, how people think. But what would you hope to see? Progression of time. What would you hope to see?
No, I would hope, to have a country that's governed by people whose decision making is restricted by a set of values. A set of values that are not just Kenyan values, that are human values. And I mean, if we go back to basics and say no person should die of hunger, No child should die of diarrhea. Nobody should be subjected to cruel and inhuman punishment. Basic values. And then we make decisions. I mean, if I'm going to build a road and it's going to cut through this person's land and I'm going to deprive this person of a livelihood, then I have to think about how do I deal with this. If I'm going to make policy and it's going to take money away from essential services, from health, from education, then that decision is a bad decision. And everybody should agree that it's a bad decision, and so on and so forth. So we are not there yet. We are not there yet. And my hope is that we reach a place where everybody in a position of responsibility thinks about these basic things first. What is the implication of what I am doing or what I am deciding on the health of the people whom I purportedly serve?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot to think about this morning, and quite some comments coming in on that, because it's the realization that this is an issue and something needs to, definitely be done about it. Professor LUKOYE ATWOLI, who is a professor of psychiatry and dean at the Aga Khan University Medical College. Thanks for being with us this morning. We'd be very interested in continuing this conversation at a later date and seeing the progression of things. Thanks for being with us this morning.